All right, so here we have a document sent over for a Kinseo. And Marissa, I can't remember if I saw an email out to Avi with that the SRL cleanup kind of document that I had sent over.
Oh, yes. Yes, I did forward
Did
that.
you?
Mhm.
Excellent, excellent. So that's something that you can certainly use as a guide until you've done it a handful of times, and then it kind of becomes second nature at that point. But you know, starting with the margins, that's typically something that would seem kind of innocuous, wouldn't have too much of an issue across these documents, but reason we change the margins to kind of a standard 1 inch
Mhm.
is to essentially make sure that every other document that comes in has that same desired formatting, because what ERMS is going to do and how it handles this process is when it goes to merge your cover letter
Right.
with your standard response documents. That's going to basically take the cover letters formatting and then shoehorn everything else into it. So if everything is a standard 1 inch margin, then you know exactly what it's supposed to look like or what it's going to look like when ERMS winds up merging everything together.
Mhm.
So yeah, typically the first order of business is to come over here to layout, go to your margins, and just double check and make sure that normal 1 inch margins are the ones that are selected. If not, usually the best way to go is to kind of I do Control A to select all.
Mhm.
Um, and then just back up here, margins, normal. The other part of it is if there is a header on the SRD, they typically want to be removed. And the reason for that is ERMS um, will a lot of times just remove it, you know, or it might throw off some of the formatting in some of the latter documents, that are not part of the cover letter. Again, where everything is kind of getting that formatting. So just coming up here, double clicking in the header, and then just removing it either manually or coming up here to the header and footer options and just clicking header, remove header.
Okay. So just don't have headers on any SRDs?
Pretty much. One thing that we do or have done in the past with the like cover letter, for example, like that, will at times have, header right in the cover letter that, will kind of stay on the first page normally of the cover letter. Um, and to avoid any sort of issues with, again, subsequent documents that are loaded in or merged, um, we'll typically leave it off of those. Also, just so ERMS doesn't run into any conflicts in that regard. Um, but this section up here is typically pulled, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's typically winds up being pulled from the footer. I think in the kind of standard, um, center response documents that come from Helsinn, where is typically listed as like a disclaimer
Mhm.
in the footer. So that was something where because ERMS will a lot of times clear that out. We don't want to lose the fact that you've got this disclaimer saying medical letter may include information about unapproved products and so on. As again, from a legal standpoint, that's something that you definitely want to have included. And while it doesn't show up on every page because it's not in the footer, it's right up top, so that they see it the moment they open it up.
Right.
Um, Next up was the orientation. So coming down here, there have been times in the past, and I think it's possible that now that
There's an example right there, Patrick.
let's see. Oh, right
for
here.
that
Yeah,
table.
perfect.
Yeah.
So there are times where there, are tables within tables,
Hmm.
and that can get a little bit messy. Uh, but also pages that we've seen where just the entire table is, or I'm sorry, not even just the table. The page itself is formatted in landscape. And the way that ERMS handles that is it merges it in as a portrait uh, page. So what ends
Uh-huh.
up happening is you wind up losing, a third of your table that's provided there. So it's really important to um, do a couple things. So in this case, you can see that this particular table is formatted to basically fit within the table or the space that we have it in right
Uh-huh.
here. Down below, we've run into one where this was probably originally a landscape table, and may have had some kind of custom margins set. So what I can typically do is, select it just by using this, just clicking this kind of grab handle that
Hmm.
they have here. And then I'm going to come down to table properties, and typically under column, do this. Actually,
Yeah, if you can auto fit that
auto fit. I'm
too.
sorry. Yeah, I was
Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
right. Yeah, so auto fit to window, I believe is typically what we want to do here. And again, it may kind of skew something like this where you've got step one is no longer on a single line, but from there, you can go through and
Okay.
make a quick adjustment.
Is it necessary to kind of unclick that table preferred with or something that you did under table properties?
So, uh, I would have it highlighted, just so it knows
Hmm.
where, because if you have your cursor anywhere else outside of the
Yeah.
table, it'll likely look at the larger table that this kind of smaller table is inserted into. Now, from here, looks like there's one more down below.
Hmm.
Again, just to show you again. So I click into the table. It gives you this kind of grab handle here if you needed to kind of move it
Right.
around within the table here. We can click that, and then that will by default highlight everything auto fit window, and that's under table layout.
Okay. And then, Michael, you were mentioning that this works most of the times. Is there an instance that this wouldn't work? Is there a backup option to make sure it's
Yes,
fit?
that's excuse me, that's true. And what it really, the problem is worse when it was formerly a landscape
Hmm.
orientation. And there's lots of numbers, there might be columns of numbers for results from tests or whatever. And if that's landscape and you just change it to portrait, it'll just squash it all together. And there's a lot of work undoing the problems it caused with the numbers because you can't have numbers that have a decimal point and then two more numbers and then six other numbers below it. It just is confusing and not the
Right.
intention of the original document. I think if I may just say what I think is the best way to approach this initially is if the rule is always that it's portrait and it always has 1 inch margins, as the content is created, it'll restrict the creator to do it within a reasonable looking document.
Uh-huh.
And that will mean that we don't have to reinterpret that to fix it, to make it fit. And that's the danger. Every time we change format, we could change the context by the way the numbers look or the words look. And that's the most important part is to start off with the 1 inch margin and the portrait setting. And then from there, you can't go wrong as you create the content,
Right.
you see. So, and that when it comes here, then it's a very easy task to just go through it and make sure it just is that way. If you start taking it apart and putting it back together, you know what, I'm always afraid that it's going to change the readability and the usefulness of the document.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. That's something that we always want to try and put it in as it's intended, and have it look the way that you all drew it up. Um, Granted, again, this process may kind of skew that a little bit from the person who's initially putting these together, but at the same time, we're kind of working within the confines of the system that we have, and that's something that we know that when we essentially are kind of trained by the vendor, Anju, who manages the ERMS platform. They talk about all the the caveats to putting in a standard response document, and potential pitfalls for the merge process, that sort of thing. So kind of all of this is come about through years of essentially working with this system, and kind of knowing the intricacies of it.
Right.
So
Thank you both.
yeah, of course. So from here, that's kind of the gist of how everything should work within the document itself, within Word, the application. And from there, there are a couple other steps that we usually take to essentially strip out any kind of style information. So without going too far into the weeds, Word has this styles
Hmm.
section up here where you can just very quickly do your basic style. So let's say your default is Calibri 11, just as an example. Now you can absolutely leave it as is, and it'll come out perfectly fine. But there are other times where if the author of this document has a different default style. So let's say instead of what is the default on my machine, Calibri 11, theirs is Arial 12. Um, it's not going to like it when I open it up, it's going to show up as Arial 12. However, when it goes through the merge process,
Hmm.
it's going to then skew that. And there are times where it can pop up, and despite me looking at it on my end in Word, and it shows Calibri 10 here, um, that merge process could take it and then set it to its default style, style one, or default style. And it winds up then turning it to like Times New Roman, and then it skews not only the formatting, in the sense that like it's pushing pages down because
Right.
maybe the font's bigger or something along those lines. Um, but it's just gonna throw everything out of whack from top to bottom. So from there, what we'll do is we'll save the document, and then basically open it. Or actually, I'm sorry, we'll save it as a rich text format document. So I would go over here, save as rich text format, and hit save. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to effectively strip out any of that style information, and it's just going to be what you see here. Calibri 10 is what this table within a table is supposed to look like, and it's not going to leave it up to kind of the interpretation of the merging tool that ARMS uses, where it's going to say, oh, this person's not looking for Calibri 10, they're looking for style 1. But its interpretation of style 1 is going to be different than potentially what somebody else has set up on their version of Word.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
may I throw something in here, Patrick?
absolutely.
Um, Word, for whatever reason, uh, has defaults. It's a template within Microsoft Word called normal. And
Mhm.
normal is a definition that Microsoft has come up with, and it's certain spacings and whatnot. And one of the things that's really the most uh, common problems we have is that when you go into a document, a typical document, you'll have line spacing that isn't single line. Could you
Mhm.
select like a paragraph there, Patrick? And
Yeah, of course.
we'll okay. And then if you go up to layout and then over to the spacing section right in the middle,
Mhm.
if you click the lower, yeah, there you go. You see, this is a document that is absolutely perfect. It has in the middle there spacing before and after 0 points.
Mhm.
Typically, if you just start a document out of nowhere with Microsoft Word, it'll have an 8 point uh, after. And what that'll do is it naturally separates paragraphs when you hit enter. So if you
Uh-huh.
type a paragraph that's longer than several lines, it'll say fine. But when you hit enter, it'll put a little space in between. So one of the things that happens is we bring these documents in, go through it's like 3 steps for us that can be done on your end too. It's the
Mhm.
margins, the portrait or orientation, and then the spacing. If it's set to 0 points before and after and single spacing,
Mhm.
then there's no surprise on our end when we get it. If there is, and many times, typically, there's an 8 point after, as I said, what happens is when we bring that in, we have to get rid of all that when we go save it as a RTF file, the
Right.
rich text. And when we save it, it takes all that out. And then we have to go back in and insert spaces where the computer naturally did. And so that can change the pagination a little bit. So, um, but if those 3 things are considered during the creation, it saves us so much time.
Okay.
So, the
Absolutely.
margin, orientation, and spacing at 0 and single line spacing. Those 3 things, if we get a document like that, it's hard for it to be wrong.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, again, if this is set up properly, again, we can take it, you know, download it from the work order and then just directly import it into ERMS. And, obviously we'll wind up testing it on our end just to make sure that, everything looks correct. But, uh, being able to just drop it in, test it, and see that everything is okay, make sure that the team gets the document in a timely manner, and that we're getting these things out when they're needed. So the other thing that I'll do, and again, thank you, Mike. That was a very, very good point on the spacing. I'll throw the paragraph markings in just so
Mhm.
you can see kind of between um, the different paragraphs, that there is a return, so you can see that there's no gaps in here. And if you do see something like that, then that's usually an indicator of double spacing, or the
Right.
point 0.8 that Mike was referring to. And the kind of the long and short of it is, if it does have that type of spacing in here, when ERMS goes through the merge process, a lot of times, yeah, again, that'll get stripped out. Um, Second, my phone is ringing. So from there, basically, it'll strip that out, and basically what you'll wind up seeing after the merge is, just as an example, like these things will be all kind of stuck together like this. Um, and then we would then need to kind of check it back out. We'd need to go back in and edit and then add those spaces in manually. And then again, that's where, kind of a lot of time is taken up. And, originally when we kind of met with Helsinn to discuss these types of things, it was because, I think there was one month where they got a bill that, seemed really high. And then we kind of went over, oh, well, this is all the work that we did. Then it made a little bit more sense in that regard. And that's really kind of what we're trying to avoid, is you guys getting, build more than you're expecting, certainly because we're playing cleanup essentially. But from here, let me just kind of finish going over the rich text format
Hmm.
side of things. So I've already saved this as a rich text format. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it up, but I'm going to open it as I'm sorry, in WordPad. So when I go to the document, the rich text format document that I'm going to open with, and actually this is on my other screen, so you can't see it, but um, the the way that this works, and it's in that kind of work instruction document that was sent over. You just you're right clicking on it, open with, and then you choose WordPad and click OK, and it'll open up. And then I'll drag this over in a second so you
Patrick,
can
I'm
see.
only seeing your Microsoft Word. I'm not seeing your other
Yeah,
screen.
no, I'm sorry. The actual like pop-up is on my main display, and
Okay.
yeah, so it didn't actually pull up on the screen that I'm sharing. But give me a moment here. I'm gonna um, oops, I'm actually gonna need to close this out. Okay, and here, let me see if I drag this window over here and open with, if it'll pop up here. Oh, well, okay, cool. So let me back up a second. I'm gonna right click, open with, more apps, and then down to WordPad.
Hmm.
Took a minute, but it popped open. So here you have the document in rich text format. I would typically go through and just kind of eyeball this just to make sure that it looks the same. So these are the kind of small tables that we reformatted
Hmm.
earlier, so it's not running off the side of the table, which is good. The other thing about looking at this in WordPad specifically is I think by default it basically gives you just kind of like one long page, so you're not seeing the same page breaks. But really, all
Patrick,
that.
I have a quick question. If you scroll
Sure.
down, it looks like one of the tables is still wonky.
Okay.
There
Yep.
you go, that one.
Sure. So that's something that again I likely would have gone through and
Right.
updated previously. We're just using the
Gotcha.
other two as examples. But from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to open this up in WordPad and save. And in doing so, that has now stripped out all of the style information that we were talking about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen this in Word. And just kind of very quickly eyeball it to make sure that, everything looks, as it should. And if anything, changes like spacing or something like that, that's where, again, I would probably want to put the paragraph markings on. You can see here, this is a solid example of what Mike was talking about earlier, where you've got this McKinsey prescribing information continued, and then right under it, there's definitely a space there, but there's no paragraph marking. So if I were to highlight this, it looks like it's actually the line just below it that actually has the spacing issue here. So you've got
Hmm.
added space up above.
Yeah.
And again, just changing this to 0 before and after. We'll fix that right up, and then I'll add a return in there.
Yeah, while you're sitting there, Patrick, in this screen,
Mhm.
notice how that continued thing, that should be at the very top of the screen. So
Right.
things were repaginated slightly, just enough to throw that off. So you'd expect comparing this to the original document that the person, putting the thing together obviously put that at the top of the page. And
Mhm.
what has happened is it's just repaginated and added that or pushed it down a couple of lines. So that's the kind of thing that if you start from the rules that we set, it
Right.
will not do that because we'll get something that is really ready in the first place.
Right. And it'll be as you guys intended it. So, when you kind of follow these rules and you get to the point where you're doing that last final save before you send it over, um, and everything looks good, as long as the steps were followed, typically it's going to wind up being 1-to-1.
Okay.
They're going to be probably a few exceptions to that, but that's typically then where we would step in and just kind of troubleshoot it, make sure that it looks okay. But this is going to solve kind of 99% of issues, I would say.
Okay.
Um, but now from there, yeah, once I've got this back in Word, there are definitely still formatting issues with this one, but just for the sake of time, we'll say that we're where we need to be. I'm going to click Save As, and then I'm going to just switch it back to Word document one last time because that's exactly how we're going to upload it is as a Word document. From there, we're going to click Save. I've already got a Word document version of this because that was the initial one that I opened up. And you can either, you know, uh, change the name if you want to save it to a separate file, or just overwrite. In this case, I'm just going to overwrite it, replace existing file, and then from there you would be able to send it over to us. And again, hopefully at that point, um, we're able to just kind of drop it in and get it ready for the team. But if we run into issues or something like that, we can always provide a little bit of feedback to say, hey, this one, uh, was missing, this step or something like that. And, we have no problem cleaning that up on our end. But, if it's something that would be helpful for just kind of the initial formatting of these documents, we're happy to kind of provide that detail.
Okay.
That is the process, kind of in a nutshell. Mike, is there anything that you can think of that we've kind of missed or haven't touched on, or anything that's come up, kind of recently in Helsinn documents that,
Um,
we,
Once in a while, there is a illustration or what
Mhm.
is effectively a picture that's inserted that might be a chart. It might be something that illustrates something that you can't say. You can say easier that way than in words.
Right.
Sometimes they are bigger than they need to be, and they need to be sized down. But unfortunately, what happens is when you're sitting there, with a blank page in Word, starting to develop this content, you
Mhm.
start off with in disadvantage because Word typically uh, has that weird spacing. It has a 8-point following, and it has you know, it the margins aren't necessarily the same. But that's like when you start up the thing. So as soon as you start it up and start just working, you're automatically working in a world where you're going to come out some way different when we change margins or spacing in the text.
Right.
So, it would be much easier for the content creator to work within those limitations. It would force them to make some just different decisions sometimes because of that limitation, but it would be easier and safer for us to make sure that the document comes across the way you want it to the person reading it.
Right.